Court call 20 CR 1358, People versus Letecia Stauch. Record should reflect the jury is not present in the courtroom. Is there anything we need to take up outside the presence of the jury at this point in time?
Just briefly, I don't know if it's me having a senior moment or not, but did the court actually qualify Dr. Moore as an expert, or did you just jump right into the instruction? Because I
thought I said the witness will be so qualified, and then I read the instruction.
Okay. As long as we're all on the same page.
If we didn't.
I can have a court reporter check if you would like, but I'm pretty sure that that's what I did. And you had offered her as an expert in the field of general psychiatry and forensic psychiatry.
That's correct.
So let's check the record.
I've just described to you diagnosed you as early on.
Little OCD maybe? Well, I accept that diagnosis. Please tell my wife.
Offered it. Had that. Then court came back on and said, got to hear his evidence or just. Said those words.
I apparently, based on the record, I did not. Now that she read that, I remember that there was an objection, and it had to do primarily not with her qualifications, but with the scope of her testimony regarding giving an opinion on potentially an ultimate issue to be decided by the jury without going into the bench conference. And so I can just leave it as is. I can tell the jury that she is qualified as an expert in the fields of general psychiatry and general psychology and forensic psychology.
I would prefer that you did that just so the jury hears it, and perhaps you can just say or remind you you've been qualified or something.
I'll just tell them that it was that we had the bench conference, and I should have said that, and I didn't, and we'll go from there.
Appreciate it, Judge. Thanks.
Okay.
I'll take
Go ahead and bring the jury
back.
I take your diagnosis.
It's okay if Dr. Moore resumes the stand.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Dr. Moore, if you would resume your seat in the witness stand, I remind you, ma'am, that you're still under oath. All rise for the jury, please. Thank you. You may all be seated. Court will recall 20 CR 1358, People versus Letecia Stauch. Record should reflect the jury has returned to the courtroom. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before we get started this afternoon, I wanted to go back through something that I should have done this morning. It was not clear from the record whether I did. We checked the record, and what happened was that the prosecution offered Dr. Moore as an expert in the field of general psychology and forensic psychology And then we had a discussion here at the bench, and I read you an instruction. I did not specifically state that she is qualified to render opinions in those expert fields. She is qualified to render those opinions in those expert fields. I should have said that explicitly before I gave the instruction. My error and my oversight. So with that, prosecution?
Thanks, Your Honor. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, Dr. Moore. Before the lunch recess, we were talking about your meeting with Ms. Stauch on March 5th, 2020. Do you recall that?
Yes.
I want to go back to that meeting. Do you remember about how long you met with her that day?
I do not recall exactly the time.
Was it an hour, 2 hours? I don't know.
Most likely it would have been about 30 or 45 minutes.
Okay. During this conversation, did you talk to her about any concerns that she might have with her ability to cope with being incarcerated at the jail?
Yes.
How did she respond to that?
I believe that she was a bit tearful, but generally okay.
And we talked a little bit about her demeanor this morning, but during your entire time with her on March 5th, did her demeanor seem to stay the same?
Yes.
Did she mention to you whether or not she did this crime when you asked her that?
I'm going to refer to my notes very quickly, but from what I remember, she said, first, I did not do this.
Okay. And did she elaborate on that?
I believe she did. Let me just double check. She said, I feel like an animal in a cage and I am innocent.
Okay.
And she also said, I don't belong in a place like this.
Did she go on to tell you about her anxiety and her symptoms due to her anxiety?
Yeah, she described having some bad chest pains and inability to breathe and panic attacks. She reported panicking and thinking about people dying and other random thoughts.
Did she talk to you about whether or not she was able to manage her anxiety in her everyday life?
She did.
What did she say?
She reported that she typically stays busy and works out and eats healthy food, more fruit as opposed to carbohydrates, just to stay healthy and manage her anxiety that way.
Did you ask her about her educational background?
Yes.
What did she say about her educational background?
She had a master's degree in education with a specialty in special education and had a PhD in education from Liberty University.
And did the conversation you were having with her on March 5th, did that give you an indication that she was educated and she was able to respond to your questions appropriately and have a normal conversation?
Yes.
Did you ask her any questions about her family and social support?
Yes.
What did she say about that?
She talked about her daughter and her aunt as her primary social supports. She did note that she had not talked to her husband in a bit of time as well.
Did she tell you why she hadn't talked to her husband?
She said that he believed that she was guilty.
And did that create anxiety for her, or did she tell you?
I don't believe she told me that, and I don't know that it did.
Okay. And did she tell you how long she was married?
6 years.
Did she tell you how her marriage was going prior to her incarceration?
I believe that when she was talking to me, she said that she did, they were having some issues. I believe she didn't want to just kind of be a stay-at-home mom and stepmom. I think she wanted to more so use her education and reported some emotional abuse in that relationship.
Did she talk to you about an incident that occurred as she's being transported to Colorado Springs from South Carolina?
Yes.
What did she tell you about?
She reported that while she was on her way here, she was sleep deprived due to being in the car for about 19 hours. And she said, I didn't know I was sleepwalking and hadn't been eating. I thought someone was coming for me, so I took the monster can and threw it.
And did you have any independent information with regards to that incident?
Yes.
What independent information did you have?
During her transport, the information that was shared with me was that she was trying to harm herself with her handcuffs.
Okay. And who shared that information with you?
One of our inmate classification specialists, Deanna Bowman.
And is that because you're trying to figure out if she might be a harm to herself or others? Are you getting information from as much people as you can?
Yes.
Did you talk to her about any history of victimization?
Yes.
How did she respond to that?
She had reported some physical and emotional abuse within dating relationships. Again, the emotional abuse within her marriage.
Did she tell you whether or not she was ever told if she was a good stepmom or not?
She reported that she was told that she was never a good stepmom.
And did she tell you who told her that?
Her husband.
What else did she tell you about her home life with regards to being a victimized or being a victim?
She was told to just provide love and attention to the children because her husband made a lot of money. And again, she said she did not want to just throw away her doctorate.
Okay. And do you have your notes up there in front of you?
Yes.
Obviously, this has been over 3 years ago. Is that helping you refresh exactly what she told you and what you put in your notes shortly after this conversation?
Yes.
Okay. Did you ask her about her strengths or perhaps her weaknesses?
Yes.
And what did she say about her strengths?
She reported being smart, helping others, and being good at sports.
Did she talk about any concussions that she may have had?
Yes.
What did she say about the concussions?
She received a couple concussions while playing softball.
Did she say whether or not these were serious concussions or minor concussions?
They were minor. Typically, if there's a concussion, we'll ask if there's any sort of history of traumatic brain injury, and none was reported. I asked her if there was any change in behavior or functioning afterward, and she said no.
What are some of the things you might see if someone you're evaluating may have a brain injury?
They could recall forgetting certain words. They might have some lapses in memory, have difficulty completing everyday tasks. So they might not be able to just function as easily. It might take more effort.
Would that be something that would be apparent to you as an expert in psychology? If someone did have a brain injury, for instance, myself, if we're talking, would you notice some kind of signs, perhaps slowness in speech, that kind of thing?
Typically a slurred or slowness in speech, typically getting mad at yourself when you can't recall information that you want to. It's kind of that tip of the tongue phenomenon where the words are right there, but you can't get it out. Those are some things that you would see.
And did you examine her head or look for any injuries to her head?
Typically, when I'm meeting with somebody, I'll look over their entire body, but there was no observable injuries that I noted.
Okay. Did you ask her about any attempts to harm herself in the past?
Yes.
What did she say about that?
I cannot recall off the top of my head. I believe that she initially denied that in this encounter.
Do you remember telling you something about trying to harm herself with handcuffs as she's being transported?
I don't believe she would have been the one that said that. I think that was reported that she was trying to do that, but she did not report that to me.
Okay, and that's my fault. It says per inmate classification.
Yes,
So you're getting that from another deputy.
yes.
All right, I apologize for that. Did you observe her wrist and see any injuries to her wrist?
I do not recall.
If your notes say that there were no observable markings, would that be accurate?
Yes.
With regards on March 5th, 2020, I don't have page numbers for your notes, so I apologize, but it says 2:51 p.m.
What time?
It's 2:51 p.m. It says patient answered and had linear train of thought. What do you mean when you say that?
A linear train of thought is when somebody's speaking and there's not any gaps in their speech. It was just very kind of straight along a consistent path. So there wasn't any oddities that I noted in her speech or thought.
Okay. And in that same note, you indicate she did not appear to be responding to internal stimuli. No auditory or visual hallucinations were observed.
Correct.
Do you recall making that note?
Yes.
And why do you make that note on March 5th, 2020?
Again, when looking at an overall clinical evaluation, you are going to assess for everything: anxiety, depression, psychotic thought processes. So typically the most common observable signs in a psychotic disorder would be responding to internal stimuli. So there might be a voice in someone's head talking. They might be, again, looking around the room, talking to somebody who is not in the same room. And so I will note that if I do not observe any of those concerns.
Do you also ask her questions like, does she understand what she's being charged with, where she's at, that type of thing?
Yes, so we'll go over, we call it orientation or a brief mental status exam. And so we'll look at somebody's orientation to person, meaning themselves, place, so where they're currently at, time, if they, in general, they know the current date, month, year. So we will assess for all of that orientation, and then again, kind of why somebody was here. So I would always ask somebody, do you know why you're in the jail? And they would respond.
And how did she respond to those questions?
She was oriented to person, place, time, and situation, and there was no concerns noted with her mental status at that time.
Did you note that she was aware of her charges, where she was and who she was? She was oriented to time.
Yes.
And again, why do you make that note in this particular record?
In general, it's just to ensure that somebody is oriented, because if somebody's not, that could be due to a variety of psychiatric illnesses. So we note that to, again, just state somebody's doing fine. There's no concerns noted at that time.
Now, after your March 5th, 2020 interview evaluation with the defendant, what was the game plan? What were you going to do next with her? Did you set up other times to meet with her, or just explain that to the jury?
So typically and as I had mentioned earlier, we had placed her on suicide watch just due to the nature of her crime being a first incarceration. So when somebody's on suicide watch, we see them every day until they come off of suicide watch, and we place them on what's called transition status. So that means that they still have some limited property. There's specialized housing for that. And then we'll do a 24-hour follow-up after somebody comes off suicide watch, a 5-day and a 7-day follow-up. So about kind of a 2-week time frame we'll follow up. So that was the initial plan, to maintain her on suicide watch at that moment, as well as refer her to the psychiatrist for the medications. As she had mentioned, she had been taking medication prior to coming to the jail. And then I also placed her on special needs monitoring. And what that is a recurring 30-day follow-up with somebody while they're in custody. And again, I did that just due to the high profile nature. I wanted to make sure that we were providing her adequate follow-up on a relatively frequent basis.
And do you know whether or not the jail would monitor her, especially in the beginning, March 5th, 2020, every few minutes to make sure she's doing okay?
They do. When people are in restrictive housing or in the medical ward, and initially she was placed in the medical ward due to the high profile status, some concerns for her safety. So anybody in restrictive housing is assessed by the deputies on the ward every 15 minutes.
And so if something unusual happened during this 15-minute watch period, would you learn about it and do some follow-up with it?
Yes.
Did anything unusual happen in the beginning of Ms. Stauch's incarceration at the jail?
Not specifically that day, but there was, within the month of March, there was a couple times that I had been asked to do some follow-up meetings with her.
And we'll get to those once we get to your notes. I do kind of want to jump ahead a little bit. At some point, did you learn that Ms. Stauch was raising competency issues in court?
Yes, I believe that was around the beginning of June.
June 5th, 2020? Sometime after that period, did Ms. Stauch raise a concern that she might have multiple personalities?
Yes.
I know that's not the term that we use in the DSM-5, but on your March 5th, 2020 evaluation, did you see any signs of dissociative identity disorder with Ms. Stauch?
No.
And what might you expect to see if she did have that disorder on March 5th, 2020?
I would expect to see somebody that was losing gaps of time. Somebody who would be reporting some concerns like, I don't remember certain historical information, so significant life events like a marriage or a death. Somebody would also be losing gaps of everyday events. So somebody with that disorder might go, let's say, shopping, and they would come back, and if they came back to their main personality at that time or personality state, they would have no idea why they bought things. They typically forget things like how to do their job, use a computer, how to drive. So I would expect somebody in a jail setting to be reporting loss of time and not being able to recall what occurred during those periods of time.
And did you see anything of that, like that, or of that nature on March 5th, 2020?
No.
Did she ever change her voice patterns?
No.
Ever talk in a Hispanic voice?
No.
Ever change her name?
No.
Did you see any signs whatsoever that she wasn't the same person you were talking to at any point during that interview?
No.
At any point with your contact with her, did you see any of that?
No.
We're going to come back and talk about that as we progress through your contacts with her, okay?
Yes.
I next want to jump to March 9th, 2020. Did you have some contact with Ms. Stauch then?
Yes.
And I wish there was a way to tell you what page number we're on, but there just isn't. This is March 9th at 2:16 p.m. Do you remember talking to her about her mental condition on that day?
I do. Just give me a moment to get there. Okay, I'm there.
And so what did she have to say about how she was doing mentally on March 9th, 2020?
She was a bit irritable due to still remaining on suicide precautions.
Did she, I get, during your entire contacts with Miss Stauch, did she tend to ramble a little bit and talk?
Yes, sometimes she would just say things that I didn't ask about. And again, in a jail setting, it's y- as a therapist or psychologist, want to provide a lot of care, but also want to limit what is asked about based on not trying to become involved in things, but again, trying to limit what is specifically asked. But there were times that she would kind of blurt out information that was more case related.
And did she do that on March 9th, 2020? It might be easier if I just show you the note
Yes.
I'm looking at, if I can
No,
approach.
it's fine. Yes.
Okay. So,
Can I, since there's no
Yeah,
page
absolutely,
numbers,
yeah.
can I look so I know what you're reading from?
got it?
I don't.
So
Number
two-
16.
Yeah. So on March 9th, what did she tell you about whether or not she had control of her brain? Do you see that in your notes anywhere?
Yes, she said I have control of my brain and she wanted to be an advocate for herself.
And where did that come from? Did you ask that question or is she just volunteering that to you?
Just volunteered it.
Okay. And you see in your notes a little lower there where it says, she said, mentally, I'm fine.
Yes, she said, mentally I'm fine. I'm not guilty. The truth will come out.
And so where did that come from? Were you asking about the case or is she just volunteering information?
Just volunteering information.
Did you actually tell her about her charges and whether or not she should talk about them?
I did encourage her not to talk about her charges with anybody at the jail, whether that be deputies, other inmates, mental health staff, and instead that she should just be talking to her attorneys about her charges.
And just for the jury's benefit, normally these notes would never become part of the case unless mental illness becomes an issue in the case and mainly an insanity plea or something like that. Is that your understanding?
Yes,
So normally your notes would not come to the prosecution. You would not be testifying in a murder trial unless there's some relevancy to it. Is that
Yes.
right? Okay. And you probably never testified in front of a jury before, right?
a couple times, but
Okay.
not very often.
These guys are nice guys. Look at them. What a good group that is over there, isn't it? All right. So what did you do when she told you all this? Did anything change with her situation or how often you would meet with her?
I discontinued what we call a red sheet and began a yellow sheet. So a red sheet is, they're both forms of suicide watch, but a red sheet, they just have limited property. So not even a book or a cup in their cell. They'll be able to be given water, but they can't use those things because they could hurt themselves or cover up windows with them. So a yellow sheet, they just get a little bit more freedom. So book, cup, potentially a pencil, things like that they can have.
And I guess, I think I understand what you're saying. If he's progressing, if there's such a term as normally through the jail setting,
Yes,
now that she's been there a few days, and
yes,
so you're lowering the level of suicide watch, for lack of a better term?
yes.
Okay. And is that based on what she's telling you?
Partially that, as well as not evidencing any self-harm or suicidal ideation. So she's not saying, I want to hurt myself or kill myself. She's not reporting hopelessness. So generally just seems to be a bit safe.
So up until now, is she progressing just like, again, I don't know if normal is the right word to use, but a normal person who's been charged with first degree murder, you get booked into the jail, the suicide watch is going to be high until there's a reason to lower it. Is that fair?
Yes,
Is that what's going on with Ms. Stauch at this time?
yes.
Okay. I want to jump to March 12th now. And let me just ask you if you remember her telling you anything about having a photographic memory.
She did.
What was that all about? Do you remember?
Again, just something that she reported without asking about it. She said she has a photographical memory and is acutely aware of all of the things that she sees and hears.
Is that consistent so far of what she's been talking to you about up until this date?
Yes.
March 13th, you had another visit with her. Do you recall that one?
Yes.
And do you recall having a note about thought content with regards to Ms. Stauch on that date? You see that one?
Thought content was appropriate, no significant mental health symptoms noted. She did not appear anxious at this time. She denied suicidal and homicidal ideation, and no psychotic functioning was noted.
So up until this point, we have no psychotic or psychosis visible to you. Really no mental illness other than her general anxiety that she's talked to you about?
Correct.
And certainly no dissociated identity disorder up till this point?
Interject to leading.
Sustained. You can rephrase.
Did you see any signs of mental illness up until this point?
No.
If you would you have noted that?
Yes.
And would you begin treatment for that mental illness?
Yes.
So March 15th, you have another visit with her. Actually, that's Nicole Reed. Do you know who Nicole Reed is?
She was one of our nurses. She did history and physical assessments. So typically about 2 weeks after people are booked into the jail, they will have another medical assessment just to make sure still everything's okay. There's no other medical or mental health concerns noted.
And so would you rely on her notes that she puts into the system in your evaluation of Ms. Stauch?
Yes.
What does she say happens on March 15th regarding a chronic mental health problem with Ms. Stauch?
I will have to refresh my memory on that.
And I can, if you don't have those notes, I can approach with them. It's March 15th at 8:52 a.m.
Sure. She said regarding a chronic mental health problem, patient has a history of mental health concerns. However, when asking patient today, she denies any mental health issues or concerns at this time.
And is that consistent with what you have seen up until this point?
Yes.
Now I want to jump to March 16th, where you actually meet with Ms. Stauch again. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Tell us about what you found with regards to what her mental condition was on that day.
I noted that everything was appropriate. So her mood was appropriate. Her thought was coherent. She had no suicidal, homicidal ideations, no auditory or visual hallucinations. She was oriented to person, place, time, and situation, had an intact memory, fair judgment, good insight.
Any evidence of mental illness up until this point?
No.
Let's jump to March 20th of 2020. Do you recall seeing her on that date?
Yes.
And I see a note on that day at 6:27 p.m. It says reason for referral, subject findings. Do you see that?
Yes.
Tell us about that. Why did you put that note in there, and what is that note about?
So the deputies had asked me to follow up with her because that was the day that we were informed that Gannon's body was found in Florida. And so they wanted me to check in with her because that is a significant event in anybody's life. And so they wanted me to check in and follow up with her.
Were you, as far as you know, the first person to tell her that Gannon's body was discovered?
I believe so.
And how did she respond when you told her?
She was a bit tearful, a little bit overwhelmed at that time.
Okay. What did she say?
She had noted that she did not have anyone to talk to in the jail. She had wanted to call her mother. And Um, she was talking also about losing some time out of her cell previously that week. So she essentially was asking to call her mom.
Did you tell her that you were there for her if she wanted to talk and provide mental health counseling?
Yes. So
Go ahead.
again, in this situation, given the charges that she was booked into the jail for, I didn't want to talk to her about the charges, but her being a stepmother and losing a child, I wanted to assess her for grief and see if she was okay in that situation. So I did try to explain to her, I don't want to talk about the charges related to that. Just make sure you're okay, as a grieving stepmom.
Did you tell her where Gannon's body was found?
No.
If you can refer to your note, did she tell you where Gannon's body was found?
She said that she was never in Florida
Okay.
and said that that's where his body was found.
So I'm sorry, but just so I'm clear, did you tell her that Gannon's body was found? Did she respond, Gannon's body was found in Florida? Or how
Yes.
did that go?
So I would have gone up to her and just let her know that his body, that obviously that he had passed, because previous to that he was alleged to be missing. So now that he was confirmed to have not been alive, I don't believe that I said that he was in Florida.
And did she tell you whether or not she'd even ever been to Florida?
Yes, she said that she was never in Florida.
Did her demeanor change during this conversation?
She was speaking a bit softer than my prior contacts with her.
Would this be evidence of a mental illness, or would this be evidence of a normal reaction of all what you just told?
It would be more evident of a normal but kind of limited reaction to hearing that information.
Okay. Did you have further conversations with her about her emotional status after you told her about Gannon's death?
I believe that I reviewed kind of some of the generic stages of grief and loss, what emotions might come up from being informed of the loss of a child, and that she could reach out if she had any further concerns about it.
And again, up until this point, any evidence whatsoever that she had dissociative identity disorder?
No.
I want to jump ahead to April 20th. Did you meet with her on April 20th?
Yes.
And tell us about that. Was this, how often are you meeting her at this point, and why?
So at this point in time, and I apologize, I forgot to mention earlier, also when people are in restrictive housing or segregated housing, we do weekly follow-ups as well. So every week that they're in restrictive housing, we do a weekly follow-up. So that was the intent of this contact.
Okay. Tell us about that contact. Do you have that there?
Yes. Looks like she, again, had a normal reported mental status. Everything was reality-based. She was engaging and cooperative. I did have to speak with her through the door because there was only one deputy on the ward at that time. She reported having some body jerks and that she had been hitting her foot at night and elbow on the wall. She had reported some nightmares, reported having some bruising on her ankles, and then unpromptedly talked about the transport back to Colorado again.
And is this the one you talked about earlier?
Yes.
What did she say this time happened on her way back from South Carolina to Colorado Springs?
She attributed to her behavior to a lack of sleep. She also um, she said that being in the medical ward was not healthy for her due to poor sleep. She then said she talked about the female deputy was holding her gun in the wrong place. She told the deputy that a few times, and she threw the monster can at her as she believed she was being attacked.
Did she say why she brings this up to you, or what prompted this discussion?
I believe it was prompted due to her initially saying that the transport-related behavior was due to poor sleep, and we were talking about sleep at that time.
Did that incident impact her status in the jail? In other words, her security status based on what happened on the transport back from South Carolina?
Yes.
Did she seem to want to, well, was she trying to lessen that restricted status based on that?
Yes. Again, being in the medical ward is not, it can get a bit loud there. So most people don't want to stay down there, and the lights do have to stay on all night. And so it is consistent with somebody having some poor sleep, because our circadian rhythms or sleep-wake cycles, we tend to prefer to sleep when it's dark and stay awake when it's light. So she wanted to be moved out of the medical ward. And she had also mentioned that she felt she was continuing to be kept in the medical ward because that we'll think that she's crazy and make her take medication.
Was she taking any medication other than what she had for the general anxiety?
No.
Did she ask you to do something about getting her out of the medical ward?
I believe so. I think she had wanted me to talk to the deputies about it.
Do you have any control over that?
I don't. In the jail, we do weekly meetings to assess everybody in restrictive housing. So, and again, anybody who might be more high profile. So we do talk about those individuals every week. But due to the safety and potential concerns for escape and her safety and things like that, it was determined for her to remain in restrictive housing and in the medical ward. Again, safety and security will trump most things in the jail setting. So although I might make an opinion, I'm not ultimately the one that gets to make that final say.
Okay. Did this continue on up until the point she was transferred out of the medical ward?
Yes.
Was it pretty consistent on April 28th? Did she bring it up again and complain about the light being on, that type of thing?
Yes.
I want to jump ahead to May 12th now. And this is a note that you have with regards to May 12th at 5:46 p.m. It's just below the one that says report evidence of suicidal thoughts, where you say no.
Yes.
Was there a point in time where she said, I can't talk to you anymore?
Yes.
What was that about?
I believe that her attorneys had recommended that she not speak to the mental health staff in the jail. She specifically said to me, I still can't talk to you because you can be subpoenaed.
And what happened to your treatment of the defendant after she said she didn't want to talk to you anymore?
Typically, we're going to respect their wishes. We're going to always offer. So anytime we have a scheduled contact, we will still offer to talk to her. And if she wants to decline, or any patient or inmate in the jail wants to decline, they absolutely have that right, and we'll respect that.
And did she tell you who was telling her not to talk to you?
I don't know that she said it specifically, but it was my understanding that it was due to her contacts with her attorney.
Okay. Now I want to jump forward to June 5th of 2020. Earlier, we talked about whether or not at some point she was raising her competency report. Is that when this occurs, on June 5th, 2020?
Yes.
And did you have contact with her on June 5th, 2020?
Yes.
What was the reason for that contact, and tell the jury about it?
So that contact was the mental health special needs progress notes. So as I had told you, we have them scheduled every 30 days for that routine follow-up. So that was the reason that I had went to talk to her that day. I talked to her for about 30 minutes. That day, she said that she had been unintentionally hitting her head, but denied any suicidal ideation at that time. She said she tried to walk through the door because she thought she was at home. She reported seeing pictures of her daughter and thinking about and missing her dogs. She said that her contact with Harley had decreased a little bit, and she was upset about not being able to be there for her daughter. She said that being in the jail and experiencing loss was just exacerbating her traumatic stress.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there. Does she go into details about this traumatic stress that she's talking about?
Yes.
What did she say?
She reported being molested at age 14, the loss of her husband, the loss of her son, loss of her licensure, loss of freedom, and loss of another family member.
Now, is this the first time during your entire contact with her at the jail that she brings up about being molested?
Yes.
How did that come about? When she talks about traumatic stress, is this a question that you're asking her, or is this something that she, again, is just rambling about and telling you things?
That's what she had reported to me. Yes.
So that wasn't in response to any questions from you. That was just something she felt you needed to know.
Yes. I typically, when I go up to talk to somebody, I say, "Hi, Mr. or Miss So-and-so, how are you today?" And then sometimes they just report a lot. And then I'll go into the other questions related to my notes after that.
And so at this point, June 5th, 2020, was she still in the medical ward?
I believe so.
If your notes indicate that she requested to go back to the medical ward.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Would that refresh your recollection as to where she's at now?
She would have been in Alpha 2, which is our female restrictive housing ward.
Okay. Is that like a general population, or what is that?
No, it's segregated housing. So typically, we'll have people that have severe and persistent mental illness that are self-harming in that ward, people that are trying to hurt other people in that ward, and then other people who are in there for disciplinary segregation reasons. So they're individuals who really can't come out with other people, and they typically come out individually 1 hour at a time.
And so back in the earlier dates, April, May, she wanted to get out of the medical ward.
Yes.
She's out now. And then on June 5th, the same day she raises competency, she wants to go back to the medical ward.
Yes.
And what happened as a result of her request?
I don't recall off the top of my head. I don't know if we moved her back or not.
Do you remember her talking to you about her going to the state hospital or Colorado Mental Health Institute of Pueblo for the competency evaluation?
Not, well, during this contact, we talked about her going for a competency evaluation, but she had not yet gone, to my knowledge.
Did she have any anxiety with regards to going to the Colorado Mental Health Institute?
I think she had general anxieties. I don't know if it was specific about going there for the evaluation, but she wasn't, I know she did say she was asking if she should start taking medications now or wait till she goes to the state hospital to get prescribed medication there.
Do you recall ever, do you recall her talking to you about Gannon during this meeting?
She had reported that it was, I believe she had said something to the effect of it being kind of too hard to handle all the stressors at one time.
And did she get into the events surrounding Gannon's death during this June 5th, 2020 meeting?
Yes,
Did she talk about a hiking trip?
yes.
What'd she say about a hiking trip?
She said she always used to take a handgun with her hiking, but did not that day. She said, I can't cope with it. It's one trauma situation too many, and it was the wrong place at the wrong time. She said she replays that week of her life over and over. She also noted she replays why she did not ask for more help or provide more information to the police. And she's now trying to begin really processing it, meaning the law, meaning Gannon.
Okay.
She said, I need to be able to talk to someone more than a social worker. She said, I was creating stories that aren't true and don't remember conversations. She then said, I need more help. She also said, I can't leave January. And then she brought up Andrew Womack and his son dying in Colorado and coming back to life 8 hours later. She said, regarding Gannon, I know that's not physically possible, but I want to fix things. I pray his same prayers and wrote him a letter. Then she said she regretted taking the back road off 25. That's Highway 25. She then said, I can't relive every situation, every day, and every hour.
Okay. Now, how did this come about? I mean, what did you say to spark her to talk about Gannon's death?
We probably were talking just about the stress because, again, when I talk to somebody and ask them how they're doing, they just kind of report this. And earlier in her verbalization, she was talking about traumatic stress. So I don't typically ask questions that would have prompted that answer. So that would have just been her volunteering that information.
Now, is this the first time in your contacts with her that she brings up things like traumatic stress and, I guess, stressors in her life?
Yes.
Anything about that conversation lead to you believe that she had a serious mental illness based on what she's telling you on June 5th?
No, instead I noted that she had reported trying to keep kind of a poker face. She was trying to deal with her problems, but also help some of the other females out. So she was giving them scriptures. I do believe at that time she was had either scriptures or a Bible or something that she was using to help cope with her stressors while in the jail as well.
And did she eventually get transported to the Colorado Mental Health Institute in Pueblo for that competency evaluation?
I believe that was in sometime in July, early August, she came back to the jail.
Now, did you meet with her again on July 14th, 2020?
Yes, I believe so. I just want to get there. Yes.
Do you recall her talking to you about her diet needs and whether or not the jail was providing appropriate diet for her?
Yes. Prior to this interaction, she had reported, I think pretty soon after she came into the jail, she had been reporting losing weight, had reported some things like having a celiac diet, which I believe in the notes, we did some testing and she did not have a confirmatory lab results that supported that, but I do believe that we were trying to accommodate some diet preferences that she had. She reported specifically on July 14th that she was going to be, so she said, I'm going to be so rich after this. And she had referred to a civil suit for not having her medical needs taken care of.
Now, is the jail food not too good there?
I don't believe it is. I have not eaten it myself, but
These things like that?
yeah.
Is that common for inmates to want to get on a different diet, such as a kosher diet and things like that?
All the time.
Is that what's going on here? Is she's demanding better food, basically?
Objection, speculation.
Sustained.
Well, what exactly did she tell you with regards to why she's going to get rich?
For having a civil suit for not having her medical needs taken care of.
You were also recall seeing her again on August 21st, 2020 at 3:52 p.m.
Yes.
And do you recall an incident where you either learned or saw that she was in her bed with a blanket over her head?
And I'm sorry, can you repeat that date?
Sure, it's August 21st, 2020 at 3:52 p.m.
Yes. I'm sorry. Okay, I found it.
Did you, it's hard to tell from your note, did you see that or did someone tell you she was on her bed with a blanket over her head?
So what I wrote is that MHD, meaning mental health director, so that's how I referred to myself, attempted to see a patient for weekly RH rounds, which is restrictive housing rounds, at approximately 14-20 hours. Patient had a blanket on her head and was sitting on her bunk. She looked up and said, "I don't want to talk." And then myself and the ward deputy signed the refusal form indicating that she didn't want to talk that day.
And as part of your role as the mental health director, are you giving what are called kites from inmates of people that you're seeing, inmates that you're treating?
So the kite system is a little bit more complicated. Well, maybe more simplistic than that. There's a blue kiosk on every ward in the facility. Any inmate can type it. We call it a kite, but it's just a little email that gets sent to a generic box. So they can click options to talk to inmate class, security. They can talk to an inmate. Sorry, just to explain, inmate classification is the people who address their housing needs. So if they want housing considerations, they'll send a kite to inmate classification. They could send one to medical, they could send one to mental health, programs, religion. So there's a variety of kites that can be sent. And so she did have access to the kite system at any time that she was out of her cell and could use that.
If there was an unusual, again, lack for a better term, an unusual kite that Ms. Stauch filled out, would it get delivered to you so that you can address it?
Not specifically. It would be something that any of the mental health clinicians would be answering. We do typically try to answer them within a 24-hour time frame. So any clinician who saw it could have answered it.
Did you see a kite that was written by Ms. Stauch on, looks like August 20th? It's just below the note that we just addressed.
Yes.
What was that kite about?
It I don't know really how to describe what it was about. Would you mind if I read
Yeah,
it?
let's just, what
Okay.
does it say? What did she write?
It says, "You let them duct tape me and cover the alarm sensors because they came for me in West Palm Beach, then came back and covered alarm with socks. I saw the car on Carriage Meadows, so we both left, gun jammed, got shot. They thought I was crazy because I watched Good Girls, but he really had tattoos. You didn't help." And then she sent another kite that said, "Being held hostage with camera, people everywhere, and no one helps. And they took my water from my dog."
And what was the response to those kites? Do you recall?
They were answered simply with the words kite received. That is what was sent back to her, because there wasn't a specific request in there. And then Caitlin, who was the one who answered that kite, also noted, so this wouldn't have been sent back to her, but would have been in the note, is these kites from patient are not consistent with prior presentation or language.
And was it consistent with your prior contacts with Ms. Stout up until this point?
That was not consistent.
And has she already returned now from the Colorado Mental Health Institute in Pueblo for her competency evaluation back in the jail?
Yes.
I want to now turn to August 28th. Did you attempt to see Ms. Stauch on that date?
Yes.
And were you able to see her?
She refused to be seen by me that day.
What about September 11th of 2020? Did you have an opportunity to talk to Ms. Stauch then?
You said the 11th?
Yeah, and I apologize. That was who is Holly Werstein?
She was our psychiatric nurse practitioner, psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. So she prescribed psychotropic medication to the inmates in the jail, in addition to our psychiatrist.
Based on her note in here, did you review that note back in September 2020?
Yes.
And is that a note in reference to her mental condition as she got back from the state hospital in Pueblo?
Yes.
What was that note about and what did you do?
So when people come back from the Colorado Mental Health Institute after a competency evaluation, we do get some records, which would include different medications they might have been placed on there, as well as diagnoses that might have differed from the ones that we initially had. So when individuals come back, we're going to look at those diagnoses, typically prescribe them the medication, because that medication is related to them now being alleged to have been competent, although they haven't had their court proceeding to confirm whether they're competent or not yet. And so I would have reviewed the records, as would have Holly, for the diagnosis as well as the medications. And Holly determined that the diagnosis that was given to Ms. Stauch, which was a bipolar disorder, was actually not consistent with her presentation. So specific to that, a bipolar disorder, in order to meet criteria for that diagnosis, you have to have previously had at least one depressive episode, which is a 2-week period of time where they meet criteria for a major depressive episode. So lots of depression. They might sleep too much or too little. They might eat too much or too little. Some things along those lines. And then you also have to have met criteria for a manic episode, which is typically 4 or more days where they are typically don't need sleep. They're feeling very joyous. They tend to become pretty irresponsible during that time. So maybe it's going on spending sprees or going out and partying a lot, things like that. So you have to have the 2-week depressive episode as well as a 4-day or more manic episode in order to meet that criteria, based on the time frame from March until at least July, when she went for the competency evaluation. We had not seen or observed any of those sort of episodes. So that's why Holly determined that that was not a consistent diagnosis with her presentation at that time.
And do you know whether or not anyone at the Colorado Mental Health Institute in Pueblo diagnosed the defendant with bipolar disorder?
I do not know off the top of my head. Typically, we'll get a pretty basic summary. So we'll get a diagnosis. It doesn't necessarily always say who it's from, as well as medications, but we don't get the full competency evaluation, and we don't always get detailed psychiatric notes from that facility.
Up until this point, had you seen any signs or evidence that Ms. Stauch had bipolar disorder back on September 11th, 2020?
No.
What did you do as a result of that? Did anything change, I guess is a better thing to say.
No.
Did she receive any additional medication based on that?
As I had said previously, anytime somebody comes back from the state hospital, we do continue those medications just because it's what they had wanted them on. And again, related to the legal proceedings of a competency evaluation, we do want to keep them on those medications. So she, I believe, had been prescribed mini-press, which is also called Prazosin, and that typically helps with nightmares during sleep. Hydroxyzine, it looks like it was increased. And again, that was a medication related to anxiety. And I don't see any other medications that that would have been added off the top of my head.
And do you recall meeting with Ms. Stauch on September 11th at 4:24 p.m. after you read this note from, is it Ms. Werstein? That's Werstein.
Yes.
Tell us about that meeting.
It looks like I was assessing her for weekly rounds. So again, the weekly segregation housing rounds. I noted that she had about 40% medication compliance, so was not taking her meds.
And how do you know that?
We have a electronic MAR, so the medication administration record, and so that shows what doses were offered, if they accepted or refused medication.
Please continue. What else did she have to tell you on that September 11th at 4:24 p.m.?
She said that the Mental Health Institute at Pueblo was going to prescribe her Boost Bar, which is also an anxiety medication. And she refused it. And she said her anxiety was getting bad and worse day by day. And then she stated that she's going to start becoming impulsive, have a different personality, and act way out of character, manic, and pull her hair out.
What was that all about? Did you ask her that question or did she just volunteer that information?
That again was volunteered information.
And is that the first time that she's ever mentioned anything to you with regards to having a different personality?
To my knowledge, yes.
Did that trigger anything on your behalf to evaluate her for dissociative identity disorder?
No. That to me made me concerned, but it made me concerned because up until that time, for the majority of her contacts, except if it was a weekend and might have not been at the jail, I was pretty much the only one seeing her. And so my concern at that time was if this information does go to court and I'm the only person assessing her, that would be a kind of a one person's word against another. So at that time, I started trying to have some other mental health clinicians also have contact with her. So it was not just my subjective, but other people's subjective observations of her behavior at that time. And again, as I had talked about in clinical and forensic settings, somebody reporting having or someone saying, okay, I'm going to start acting out, I'm going to be impulsive and have other personalities, then my worry becomes more about, are they going to start faking mental health symptoms? Yeah, essentially if they're just going to start faking things. So at that time, my thought would have been, okay, well now we might see an increase in behaviors that are going to be attempts to act out that aren't consistent with her prior presentations.
If someone truly suffered from dissociative identity disorder, would they make a statement like that? Hey, I'm going to start changing personalities.
No.
Even know to make a statement like that?
No, in dissociative identity disorder, there's not a control of kind of when the alter ego or altered personality state comes out. It happens, it doesn't happen specific with a traumatic event. It's just kind of an everyday occurrence where, again, there's those lapses of memory. And sometimes in situations where, so let me back up. Dissociations happen across a variety of mental health diagnoses. So you'll see dissociation in somebody with schizophrenia. You'll see dissociation in something like borderline personality disorder, where they might dissociate or kind of have an out-of-body experience. They might be viewing their life as if they were watching a movie, or seeing themselves, looking down on themselves, engaging in that behavior. That dissociation can happen in a variety of mental health diagnoses. Specific to, let's say, borderline personality disorder, that will be triggered by a stressor, so abuse or any perceived threat. That's kind of when that will come out. And specific to dissociative identity disorder, that there is not a control or specific instance when it comes out. It just happens. And so in that situation, when somebody's saying, I'm going to start having different personalities come out, my brain goes to, okay, they're going to start faking this and acting this out, as opposed to it being truly authentic and something that they don't have control over, which would be consistent then with a dissociative identity disorder.
And along the same lines, someone who suffers from bipolar disorder, are they going to be able to brag about being manic in the future?
No.
Would that fall under the same guidelines? That might be an indication that in the future I'm going to be faking it.
Yes.
And a week later, you met with her on September 17th at 3:41. What did you note about your contact with her then?
She reported that she sometimes feels okay and sometimes doesn't know how she's feeling. She defined the word okay as normal, functioning, and talking. She said sometimes not, because I talk to stuff. She said she has a hard time with reality in the morning, but then she's okay in the afternoon. She reported having a hard time focusing, so she wasn't reading her Bible anymore. And then she began talking about seeing demons in court on September 8th, and when she was on a hike and jumped off a cliff.
Okay.
She also reported sedatives were being aired through the vents and was not sleeping well at night.
Did you also meet with her again at 3:41 p.m.?
Yes.
And what did she tell you about her thought form at that point?
She wouldn't have specifically told me anything about that, but the thought form would have been my observations.
And what were
So
your observations? I apologize.
it's okay. I noted she was coherent, goal-directed in her comments, was easily redirectable, and appeared to be attempting to feign or fake makeup, having visual hallucinations.
And why do you say that? What was she doing?
That would have been related to the allegation that she had reported about seeing demons in court. So I know she reported that, and I noted that I did not see any of those observations.
And did you reflect back to the week prior where she said she's going to start faking these things?
Yes.
Did you see other notes within, what are these notes called within the jail system?
Progress notes.
Progress notes with regards to her acting out or acting crazy?
Yes.
I'll refer to you to October 30th, 2020 at 5:54 PM.
Yes. So on October 30th, one of the mental health clinicians, Ed Cuveney, had written a progress note. And he had added in that the ward deputy who was observing her that day or working on in the ward that day informed Ed that she stated she said she's going to act out because she wants to be listed as crazy.
Was this consistent again to what she told you back on September 11th, 2020?
Yes.
Now I want to jump forward to November 17th, 2020 at 2:18 PM. Did you have contact with Ms. Stauch then?
Yes.
And did she tell you about how she felt or what mental diseases or defect that she had on that?
She reported that she's bipolar, has multiple personality disorder, and PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder.
And is this the first time she's ever come out and said, that's my diagnosis, this is my mental illness?
Yes.
And back on March 5th, 2020, with your first contact, did you say, wait a minute, I asked you that question on March 5th and you said nothing about it?
I don't believe I said that to her specifically, but that would have been a thought I would have had, that it was inconsistent with the prior contacts, and especially at the beginning of her stay with us.
And what did you note in your notes with regards to her self-diagnosis of multi-personality disorder, PTSD, and bipolar disorder?
I said she appeared to be at baseline psychiatrically, meaning I did not see any of that. I said there's no overt symptoms of bipolar disorder or PTSD present. And I said she has not presented with symptoms of DID or dissociative identity disorder during any contacts with this writer.
And did she tell you back on November 17th, 2020, how she came up with these mental illnesses?
She reported having her competency exam was going to be conducted on November 30th. And she indicated that she is aware and she is smart.
And did you learn that she actually had a second competency evaluation as well?
Yes.
Let's jump to January 5th, 2021 now. Did you have contact with Ms. Stauch on that day at 2:37 PM?
Believes, yes, I did.
And with regards to questions that you're asking her, did you ask her about her, what is entitled thought form in your notes?
Yes.
What did she have to tell you with regards to that? Or what did you ask her and what was her response?
I don't recall specifically what the way I had formed the question, but she had said I had noted she was coherent, but she also reported that she was triggered by another patient who continues to bother her. She said that she loses it when she's re-triggered related to anything having to do with sexual assault or harassment. It sounds like the inmates or another inmate was saying some inappropriate things, such as requesting that she show her breasts in order to stop being bothered. Then she reported spending 90 days in a psychiatric hospital in Canada in 2018.
Let me stop you there on that.
Sure.
Did you do any follow-up to see if there's any records with regards to that hospitalization in 2018 that she's claiming?
I do not recall if we did. I know we had at some point we had requested records from South Carolina. To my understanding is that she had signed a release of information, but I do not believe that we got any information after the fact about this hospitalization.
Do you have any information that Ms. Stauch was ever in Canada?
I don't.
If she was in fact hospitalized at an inpatient treatment for 90 days in Canada, would there be records to support that?
Yes.
Did you make any attempts to get any records from this so-called hospitalization?
I don't believe so.
And this is almost a year, well, 10 months, 11 months after she's been placed in custody.
Yes.
Did she also talk to you about her stepfather and what her stepfather may have done to her?
Yes.
What did she say about that?
That her stepfather and uncle had sexually assaulted her during her childhood.
And is this the first time she brings that up?
Yes.
Did that have to do with what she's telling you about this other inmate asking to see her breast, or words to that effect?
Yes. So she said she only starts hallucinating when triggered by sexual harassment or assault.
What did she tell you about her intelligence level on that same day in the note just below the one we just read?
She opined that she was brilliant.
Did you ask her what she meant by that?
I don't believe so.
What else did she tell you after she said she felt that she was brilliant?
She said that she feels that she will start going crazy because she's going stir crazy in her cell.
Did you do anything or make any diagnosis based on what she's telling you now?
The diagnosis did not change based on that.
Did you do any further evaluation based on what she told you about her stepfather and uncle sexually assaulted?
No.
Did you see any signs of post-traumatic stress disorder based on what she was telling you?
No.
Why is that?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. She's telling you that she'd been sexually assaulted by her uncle and her stepfather.
Mm-hmm.
She hadn't said anything about this up until this point, January 21. Did you think that might have contributed to her having post-traumatic stress disorder?
I mean, any trauma could, any person who experiences a trauma could develop those symptoms. But again, when providing any sort of diagnosis, one of the final criteria you have to match or to make and confirm a diagnosis is a significant impairment in social, occupational, or other areas of functioning, because in the jail setting, there wasn't any significant impact related to that. It's not necessary to follow through with that. Also, specific to sexual assault or significant trauma, we don't always want to start treatment related to that because we don't know when people are leaving the jail. And so sometimes opening up and having somebody relive these traumas the jail setting is not the most appropriate place for that, because we do want that to be a very personal driven avenue in treatment. And so typically we won't start a full therapy mode related to trauma.
Okay. Now, did you have an opinion as to whether or not her claiming that she had these various mental disorders coincided with her court case. In other words, when she raised competency, it eventually pled not guilty by reason of insanity.
Yes, again, looking at diagnoses, looking at not just the criteria in the DSM, and based on my history and training and conducting forensic evaluations, typically people will, when competency is raised or other things in court, or just in general, depending on how court goes, people do tend to then over-report or exaggerate or make up symptoms that are consistent with a diagnosis that might help maybe absolve them of the charges or have a different sentence or go to a different location for treatment instead of in lieu of incarceration. So what was observed was consistent with somebody who was acting out symptoms as opposed to it being a true diagnosis and symptoms.
And your role in your position at the jail was not to perform a sanity evaluation, I take it,
Correct.
or a competency evaluation?
Correct.
In order to do that, you'd want to look at everything, I would take it?
Yes.
And when I say everything, all the police reports, everything involved in the criminal case before you can make any judgment as to that?
Correct.
Those are my questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
Cross-examination.
Thank you.
Mr. Cook?
Doctor, good afternoon. My name is Will Cook. I represent Ms. Stauch. I'm going to be asking you, I would say a few questions, but I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. I'm going to start with some questions near the end, and then I'm going to loop back to the beginning of your testimony. You said that Ms. Stauch or Letecia, only near the end, get this date. You said she only reported being molested one time to you?
That was my recollection. I believe when she first came into the jail during the receiving screening, she had reported that to the nurse doing her receiving screening intake, but I don't recall that being
Okay,
reported
well,
to
you
me
just told
initially.
Mr. Young that it was the only time that it had been reported, the molestation
To me.
to you.
You know, I'm going to object us to that. That's not the question was. The question was with regards to her stepfather and uncle.
Oh, overruled.
Do you know when the other time that she reported molestation or sex assault?
Without looking at the specific date in my notes, I think she had reported that in 2019.
When did she report it at the El Paso County Jail?
I don't know the specific
Okay.
date.
So when she comes into the El Paso County Jail, is she handcuffed? When she first gets there and you first see her, is she handcuffed? Is she in a jumpsuit? What's the situation like?
She likely would have been in her cell in the medical ward. And because of her status related to the transport, there would have been 2 deputies probably standing outside of the door. I would have been standing likely in the doorway talking with her.
Okay, so she was a high-risk inmate.
What do you mean by high risk?
You couldn't talk to her unless there were 2 deputies there.
Yes.
Okay, due to the allegations that she had tried to escape, the high-level nature, seriousness of the charges, she was having a close eye kept on her.
Yes.
Okay. Did you ever have any situations during this time where you were taken into a room, a discrete private room, and you and Letecia were able to sit down and talk?
No.
Okay. It was always you talking through a trap and a door. She'd be locked up.
No, typically we would, the deputies would have the door open. I did note just when we were reviewing some of my notes that there was one time there was not another deputy, so we did have to talk through the door, but typically the door would be open. I would typically try to talk softly, and so that way other people could not hear, and the deputies are typically instructed to just be there and present, but not intently listening into a conversation.
Okay, but you're talking about something that very private, somebody's mental health, somebody's past abuse. These are sensitive subjects for a person, correct?
Most people openly report them in the jail setting.
Hmm?
Most people openly report that regardless of who's around.
Okay, that wasn't the question I asked. These are sensitive subjects for people.
They are.
Okay. And not everybody may be comfortable with talking about them with multiple deputies there, a doctor, in an open setting.
Sure.
Okay. And you just stated, in fact, you had to cancel one meeting because there was only one deputy available to talk with her, and that wasn't allowed. Is that what happened?
No, I said we had to talk through the door, so they could not open.
They
the
couldn't
door.
even open the door unless there were two deputies with her.
Yes.
Okay. And that's not the ideal clinical setting to do mental health work, is it?
No.
It's a terrible setting to do the type of work that you were charged with doing, correct?
I wouldn't say it was terrible. I think people in a jail setting still need services, and
I'm not saying they don't need services. I'm saying this is not an ideal clinical setting. And in fact, it's a bad setting to do this kind of work. People are confined. It's stressful. It's loud. There's deputies. I mean, there's a lot of threats. People are on high alert. They don't act in jail like they would out in the street, do they?
that's kind of general because some people do and some people don't.
Okay. Some people get into jail and they absolutely collapse and their symptoms get worse, or some people don't change in jail. So it can be anything. Is
Could be.
that what you're saying? Okay. So where do you work right now? You do mental health work with sex offenders in Kansas?
Yes.
Okay. And is that Larned State Hospital?
Yes.
Okay. Where in Kansas is that?
Larned, Kansas.
Larned, Kansas. Okay. And you've been doing that from September 20 to now?
Yes.
Not September 21st, September 2021 until now.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay. So, and you're the clinical program director now.
Yes.
How many sex offenders do you supervise now?
About 250.
So that's a lot.
Yes.
Is this just a facility specifically for sex offenders?
No.
Okay. Is there a wing or a part of this facility that is dedicated to the sex offenders, though?
Yes.
Okay. Are you treating people right now, or I presumably with sex offenders, you're treating quite a few people or have a lot of treatment experience with people that suffer from pedophilia?
Yes.
Okay. And is pedophilia just a person who's sexually attracted to underage or age inappropriate people?
It's not just that. There's a pedophilic sexual interest. You could qualify it as to what you described, but a pedophilic disorder is when they then engage in those sexually abusive behaviors towards non-consenting minors.
Okay. So you have sex offenders that or pedophiles, whatever you want to have it. Generally, they prey on underage children.
Some do, and some are that prey on adults as well.
But generally speaking, a pedophile preys on minors.
Yes.
Okay. And one of the ways that minors, or one of the means of access that a pedophile or a sex offender that is preying on underage children may go through is this, is sometimes they ply the victims, the children, with alcohol or drugs to lower the inhibitions of the children, correct? That's a common theme.
I wouldn't necessarily say it was very common, but they could. Some have, but the majority of the ones that I've worked with have not been lowering minors with alcohol or drugs.
Okay. But there's grooming behaviors that go on with the adult towards the children.
In some cases, and sometimes they commit violent acts against strangers as well.
But a child predator, based on your experience, they could use alcohol to lower the inhibitions of their victim in order to gain access to them and, assault them.
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered.
Sustained.
So, at the time, September 2021, that you were employed at Larned State Hospital, you were also employed in El Paso County at the jail, correct?
Yes.
How did you do both jobs?
I lowered my hours as in the clinical program director role to part-time and took on the full-time health services administrator position. So I oversaw all of the medical and mental health care at the jail for about 11 months.
And you weren't actually an employee of the El Paso County Sheriff's Office. You were employed by WellPath,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
This is a private for-profit company, the largest medical services for prisons and jails in the whole world, correct?
I believe so.
Okay. And as a for-profit company that you were working for, your company makes more money and more profit the less money that is spent on the inmates.
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Your cook, what is the relevance?
Can we approach?
Mr. Cook.
Thank you. So according to your CV, from March 2022 to January, or from March 2022 to January 23, so just a few months ago, you were the Health Services Administrator for WellPath, which it had the contract to provide all the health and mental health care services for the El Paso County Jail.
Yes.
Okay. Before that, December 2019 to September 2021, you were the mental health director for WellPath,
Yes.
correct? And the health services administrator job, which I guess you ascended to, was created by WellPath due to litigation and suits against WellPath, your employer at the time, for poor care and a host and litany of different problems. This spot was created for you and you took it.
Objection, Your Honor, foundation.
Overruled. She can answer if she knows.
To be honest, I do not know. That position since I was the mental health director at the jail, there was always a health services administrator position. I don't know any different. And prior to December 2019, Armor was the contract company working at the jail.
Okay, but I'm talking about when you started March of 2022. You were working for WellPath. I'm not talking about the prior contractor. You ascended to that spot because there had been a lot of litigation and suits against WellPath.
Asked and answered.
No.
Objection, Your Honor.
I understand. Overruled. She can answer if she knows the answer.
No, but when I was employed as the mental health director, there was a health services administrator position there.
Okay. And were you aware of all the litigation that was going on with WellPath and your employer at the jail?
No.
Okay. Even though you were supervising financial oversight for all the healthcare services provided at the jail, clinical and administrative work, you had no idea.
Can you elaborate on what you mean then by litigation with the company? I know that
Suits against WellPath and suits against the El Paso County Sheriff's Department, who was running the jail.
so if there was a lawsuit, at the time I was the health services administrator, if there was a lawsuit, I would have been notified that there was one coming through. But in general, if there's lawsuits across the entire company of WellPath, I would not be privy to that information.
So you don't remember any lawsuits of your time when you were the health services director?
I believe that there were a few that had come through towards the end.
Okay. And from when Ms. Stout came in March of 2000, going forward, was there anything unusual going on at the jail? Or was it business as normal the whole time?
She came in 2020, not 2000.
I'm sorry, 2020. Thank you.
Was there anything unusual
Yeah.
at the jail?
Yeah.
COVID?
COVID. Did you say COVID?
Yes.
Yeah. And it completely changed how everything functioned at the jail, correct?
I wouldn't say completely changed. I think we had to be more mindful of health precautions and wear masks and extra cleaning, things like that, but not.
No, you wore a mask, the employees, but the inmates weren't given masks. And that's part of the reason there was a lawsuit that WellPath and the sheriff's office settled.
Again, Your Honor, objection, relevance, and foundation.
Sustained. A jury will disregard the question. You can rephrase it. But again, nothing that the attorneys say at any point in time is evidence. Rephrase your question.
Were you taking precautions for COVID during your interviews with Ms. Stauch?
I believe that I would have probably had to have worn a mask as required by the jail.
Okay. And when did this begin, the mask wearing?
I don't know.
March 2020, was the mask mandate already in effect March 5th when you first contacted her, or was it later in the summer? When did all this happen?
I don't know.
Okay. Do you remember a COVID outbreak in the jail? during your tenure there?
I remember the media alleged that.
Okay, you don't remember the jail allegedly having the largest COVID outbreak in the state?
Again, I believe that's how the media phrased it.
Okay. Do you remember the population of the jail during this time being 1,700 inmates before COVID and being lowered to about 11 or 1,200 within a few months because of the COVID threat?
So with the everyday activities at the jail, I mean, I don't really pay attention to why more or less inmates would be there. We
Okay.
just take care of the people who are
But,
there.
but as the health service administrator for the jail, I mean, you would notice 500 or 600 people being taken out of circulation due to medical reasons and due to the COVID pandemic.
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Sustained.
Now, I see a report that you compiled that Mr. Young from the DA's office provided to us in this case. Do you know what document I'm talking about?
I do.
Okay, when did you prepare this document?
So that wasn't, I wouldn't recall that a report, or I'm sorry, I would not term that a report. In preparation for my testimony today, I was taking some notes that I perceived as relevant based on my interactions with Ms. Stauch. And so those were just my personal notes in preparing to testify today.
And you provided these personal notes to the prosecution.
We had been discussing my testimony in terms of when I was going to testify and kind of the nature of that. And I had offered, not thinking that they'd be here right now.
So at the bottom of several of the pages, it says, qualify me as an expert, comma, jail, comma, what do now back in March 2020.
Mhm.
What does what do now back in March 2020 mean?
So Mr. Young had essentially just said that kind of the steps of me testifying today is that I need to be qualified as an expert initially prior to testifying, and then he would ask me questions about what I do now in my current role as a clinical program director and what my role was at the jail previously.
Okay. And what does GAD stand for?
Generalized anxiety disorder.
Okay. And why was that relevant?
That was
Enough for you to put in a note at the bottom of your summary.
just that was the diagnosis that she had come in with.
Okay. It says also one of the things is theme DACs.
He's essentially said that we were just going to go through all of the notes and talk about any themes that he might see.
And their theme is that she did not suffer from any conditions or have dissociative identity disorder or bipolar or any of these other things y'all spent 4 or 5 hours talking about, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, to relevance, what our theme is.
Sustained.
Well, the theme of what the DA said was important to you enough to put down at the bottom as a footnote. I guess so you remembered this during your testimony?
I typically just write what's being said. It wasn't important or not important. It's just information shared.
Well, so if it's important, not important, you just write it. Then are some of the things you wrote at the bottom as notes, are some of them unimportant?
I mean, in the sense we just talked about that I would be testifying and that was it.
So you spent some time talking about you and Mr. Young about the day, I think it was March 20th of 2020. That was when you discussed the issue of Gannon's body being found. Is that correct? Do you remember that
Yes.
discussion?
Yes.
And Mr. Young asked you, do you remember what she said? And you said, yeah, Gannon's body was found in Florida, and she said she'd never been to Florida and all this other thing. And he asked you, why was that significant?
Mhm.
Why was it significant in your conversation with Letecia? Why was it significant that she said she'd never been to Florida?
Because that's where his body was found.
Why is that significant?
Well, I'm not sure what you're asking in that sense, but typically somebody with dissociative identity disorder would not be able to, they would have kind of amnesia of certain events. And so it was odd to me that if she was not there, why she would spontaneously say she wasn't there.
Okay. And if she didn't have anything to do with Gannon's disappearance, how would she know he was found in Florida?
Correct.
That's the significance?
Yes.
Okay. Did you know that her attorneys earlier that day had been to visit her?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but if that
And
was
they had
true,
actually
then-
told her that Gannon's
Objection,
body
Your
had been
Honor.
found?
Objection.
Sustained. Jury will disregard.
So if you were to be told that her attorneys that came and talked to her that day,
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this. May we approach?
No, because I see where this one is going, and I think that you can ask it in a hypothetical, because what this witness is talking about is she's testifying about dissociative identity disorder and whether somebody would or wouldn't have recollection of an event based on whether or not they had a particular personality that was manifesting at the time that the person was in a geographical location. So if somebody had some information from some other source, you can ask the witness whether or not this would or would not be consistent with the dissociative identity disorder. So I will allow that.
well, I just say answer what he just said. But I'll try to put it to you as artfully as the judge did. If, with respect to dissociative identity disorder, if hypothetically Ms. Stauch had heard from her attorneys a couple hours before, said, hey, they found Gannon's body in Florida, would that change how you feel with DID in this portion of what was going on March the 20th of 2020?
No.
No? Why not?
Because with dissociative identity disorder, there's in the DSM, it talks about kind of a possession form or non-possession form, and possession form being, again, that amnesia on inability to recall those certain everyday events versus a non-possession form where, again, they could kind of be depersonalized or still consciously aware that things are going on and they're kind of watching themselves engage in behaviors that they might not, that they still know it's happening, but they might not perceive that they're the one doing it.
But I'm just talking about her parroting to you what her attorney told her an hour or 2 hours before you're talking with her.
Well, again, as I had previously suggested to her not to share, or actually, I'm sorry, it was that day, I think I told her not to share things. No, I'm sorry, it was before that. But I don't know why that would be relevant to share with me.
Because she's, how often, or what was her schedule for being incarcerated? As far as lockdowns, you've talked about different security levels to Mr. Young at the jail. Certain freedoms you have with different levels. When you first met her, say the first week, what was her security level, or how was she being held?
She was on suicide watch.
She was on suicide watch. Okay.
Cook, if you could find a reasonable breaking point in the next 5 minutes or so.
We can do it now.
I don't want to interrupt, but if you want to do it now, it's okay.
No, Your Honor, we can do it now.
Okay, all right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will take our afternoon recess. If I can have everyone back in the jury room at say 3:40, we should be able to start on time at that point. Again, don't discuss the case among yourselves. Don't discuss the case with anyone else. With that, I'll rise for the jury, please. The record should reflect the jury has left the courtroom. You may all be seated. Dr. Moore, if you would like to step down. You can do so. All rise for the jury, please. Thank you. May all be seated. We'll recall 20 CR 1358. Like the jury has returned to the courtroom. When we took a break, we were in the midst of the cross-examination of Dr. Moore. That's where we will resume. Mr. Cook.
Thank you. Now, doctor, I need to clarify something very quickly. I found what I was looking for. So with Mr. Young, you said that on January 5th of 2021, and if you have your notes and you need to look at those, you said it was the first time you had heard about molestation or sex abuse being perpetrated on the defendant.
You said January 5th, 2021?
Yes. I believe it's a part when she's says only hallucinates when triggered by sexual harassment and assault.
Yes, I recall that.
And is that when is that the date you testified to earlier with Mr. Young, that was the first time you'd heard about molestation?
I believe so.
Do you have your report from June the 5th of 2020? It's probably 6 or 7 months before the date we were just talking about.
Yes, I can see that. Looks like at that time she had reported the molestation at 14. So I think when we were talking about the sexual assault, that was the first time that assault was, I think that's the first time it was phrased as the sexual assault. Yes.
Molestation of a child is sex assault. Do you agree with that?
I would generally agree with that. So
Well,
I was incorrect.
when would you not generally agree that molestation of a child is a sexual assault?
So molestation to me would mean more maybe fondling and touching, where a sexual assault would be more defined as some sort of penetration.
Are you aware under the Colorado statutes there is no molestation? It's all sex assault?
I don't know that off the top of my
Okay.
head. I'd have to
Okay.
look.
All right. So you can, in your opinion, you can molest a child, and alternatively, you can sexually assault a child.
Objection, your relevance.
No, overruled.
I would consider them separate.
You consider them separate. Okay. And that's why you answered the question the way you did for Mr. Young.
Yes.
Is your belief that sexually assaulting a child is different than a child being simply molested?
Yes.
So, with respect to the dissociative identity disorder, when Ms. Stauch came in on March the 5th, 2020, were you doing an evaluation for dissociative identity disorder, anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder? Were you looking for all these things at that time?
Yes. So as I had previously explained, I generally want to cast a wide net and see if there's anything, any sort of symptoms going on.
Okay. And were you able to rule out dissociative identity disorder fairly quickly?
at that time?
Yes.
In a sense, yes.
Okay. And that would be June the 5th, 2020?
I thought we were talking about March the 5th.
I'm sorry.
It's
It's late in the day.
It is late in the day.
March the 5th, 2020. Yes. The first day she came to
Correct.
CJC, the jail, and you saw her.
Yes.
Okay. And you testified that you had met with her for about 45 minutes on this March the 5th, 2020 date?
I said it probably about 30 to 45 minutes.
30 to 45 minutes?
Yes.
Okay. And in that time, you were able to rule out dissociative identity disorder, more or less?
Yes.
Okay. When she was on medical watch, was that period of medical watch for her, I guess suicide watch or whatever you want to call it, the mental health ward, was that from March 2020 to May of 2020? Approximately?
No, I believe that that March, I believe, and I'm sorry off the top of my head, I'd have to refer back to my notes, but I think we had decreased her suicide watch, I think within about the first 2 weeks
To what?
to transition.
Okay.
status.
And when you're in the medical ward or the secure ward, the high risk ward, whatever Miss Stauch was when she came in, she was locked down in a cell 23 hours a day and only allowed out for 1 hour a day, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And your understanding, what was the person or inmate allowed to do for that 1 hour?
They could, so she would have been, if we're talking about the time that her housing location was the medical ward, she would have then, for her hour out, been transported to Alpha 2, which was the other ward that I told you that she could have been in. And during that time, she could have talked to any family or friends on the telephone, taken a shower, could have worked out on the exercise equipment. There's usually a book cart in there, so taking out different books that she could read. Generally, maybe if other inmates were talking, associate with them, talk to the ward deputy. She would be the only person out on the ward, but people talk all the time through the cell doors to one another as well.
So she's solitary. She's wandering around for her single hour by herself out there.
I would not use the word solitary. I would use the word restrictive. Solitary is more when you have absolutely zero contact with other people, whereas restrictive housing, you still can talk to people.
Well, the contact, she has no face-to-face contact. Everybody's behind a door, a big locked jail cell door,
The ward deputies would have been there, so she would have had contact with them.
but no other inmates.
Not face to face, correct?
And then she went to A2 eventually. Does May 2020 to about March of 2021 sound about right?
I honestly don't recall if that's how it's recorded. I would
Okay,
agree with that, but
Well, let's just
I don't have
assume
those dates.
let's just assume she was in A2 ward. That's still a very restrictive ward. 1 hour out a day, 23 hours locked in your cell.
yes and no.
Okay. And around this time in your summary, you said that you visited or met with Miss Stauch 34 times.
That was across from March 5th to, I think it was January of 2021.
Okay. And were these primarily her cell door being opened and you and two deputies kind of standing at the doorway or sitting down at the doorway and you talking with her?
For the most part, if she happened to be out on the ward, I would talk to her there, but I think the majority would, how you described it would be accurate.
Okay. How long would those visits last?
They could last anywhere probably from about 5 to maybe 30 minutes, depending on what we were talking about.
Okay. And you're basing your findings and opinions and what you've told the jury based on those visits, in-person visits with Ms. Stout, correct?
That and the collateral information that I had access to, as well as my staff's reports and deputy reports.
Okay. Now, other than the 1 hour, Ms. Stauch's more or less locked in a cell by herself for 23 hours, correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Except for the hour out during this time, or majority of the time, Ms. Stauch is locked in a jail cell for 23 hours.
Yes.
And you weren't able to observe what she was doing for those 23 hours a day.
Deputies would observe that and write reports.
Okay. But there's not somebody watching her those 23 hours
The
while
int-
she's in the jail cell. I mean, she could be eating her own feces in the jail cell and nobody would know.
So two things with that. There's 15-minute checks, as well as the camera system in the wards. You can typically see through the windows in the cells. So in essence, there is 24-hour observation. You might not be able to see everything, but we can go
So
back.
during your time working, speaking of these every 15-minute checks in these wards, somebody was found hanging cold from one of their cells and the 15-minute check had been missed while you were there. Do you remember that?
Objection, your relevance.
Overruled.
Yes.
Okay, so mistakes were made during this every 15-minute check for somebody to have hung themselves and been missed several checks, so much so that when they took the body down, it was cold.
It could happen, yes.
Okay. Also, there's a lot that could have been missed with what Ms. Stauch was doing the 23 hours when she was locked down in her cell, correct?
Yes.
Now, with respect to dissociative identity disorder, you were able to tell me that just within pretty much on March 5th, 2020, the first day in 30 or 40-minute meeting with her, rule out dissociative identity disorder, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I have a copy of the DSM-5,
Sure.
and that's more or less the Bible of psychology and psychiatry, correct?
Sure.
Okay. And we were talking earlier about possession forms of dissociative identity disorder and non-possession forms. And it says most individuals with non-possession form dissociative identity disorder do not overtly display their discontinuity of identity for long periods of time.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So those are kind of shorter periods of time where people could dissociate and I mean, sorry, it's kind of just how it's written. I think what you're getting to is, could there be times that it happened allegedly and it not be seen? Sure. However, in my initial evaluation with her, typically somebody who was having these amnesias or losses of time would report that. They would report something that they were worried about missing gaps of time, as well as forgetting things. And so there would be a general concern that I would expect somebody to report, not somebody to have an adequate orientation and deny any of that. There's also comorbid symptoms that go along with that. So people with dissociative identity disorder tend to be have a high rate, about 70% have attempted suicide or engage in frequent self-harming behaviors. So those things were not met. I also would have expected somebody to report clinically significant impairment in social and occupational functioning as a result of that. So when somebody denies those things, then I can absolutely rule it out because it's not a concern to them. So it's not impairing their functioning.
So you can rule out a disease that symptoms may not manifest themselves for long periods of time. You can rule it out in just 20, 30, 40 minutes. Is that what you're saying?
Generally, and then if there's
Okay.
more information, I can
Now,
always
in
go back.
dissociative identity disorder,
I'm going to ask that she be allowed to finish her answer before the next question.
Sustained. You can go
and I'm
ahead
going to
finish.
ask that she be more responsive to the question and answer it and not.
I understand. It seemed to me that it was responsive to the question. You can go ahead and finish your answer.
I was just trying to say that if there were other symptoms that came up, a diagnosis is something that is working. Could it be changed if new symptoms come up? Absolutely.
And sometimes it can take years to diagnose somebody with dissociative identity disorder, correct?
In terms of years, it can present at any time, but I wouldn't say someone would take numerous years to form that diagnosis.
It also says only a small minority of individuals with dissociative identity disorder present to clinical attention with observable alternation of identities.
It's
Hold on, let me ask the question.
okay.
Okay. That means that at any given time, a person with dissociative identity disorder is only going to present exhibiting those symptoms a small percentage of the time, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Obsessive compulsive disorder and anxiety are some of the symptoms of dissociative identity disorder, correct?
No, they're not some of the symptoms of it, but they could be associated with that or what we call a comorbidity. So, and a diagnosis that could occur alongside of that diagnosis.
And some people who actually suffer from dissociative identity disorder are actually initially diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety, or bipolar, correct?
Including that, it could also be depression, personality disorders, that they could be really diagnosed with anything.
When you see diagnoses in a psychological sense, it'll say diagnosed with this and then rule out this.
Yes.
Did you do any of the rule out stuff for dissociative identity disorder, bipolar disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder?
Again, yes, I mean, it was related to, again, as I explained, casting a wide net. You see what symptoms they're reporting and what things are concerning to them, because when you're diagnosing, again, if it's not clinically or significantly impairing their day-to-day functioning, you don't qualify that as a diagnosis. That is usually, I think in dissociative identity disorder, maybe criterion E, but it could be a different criterion letter in any of the diagnoses. It has to clinically significantly impair their functioning in order to be diagnosed.
So when you were ruling out Ms. Stauch, having bipolar disorder, which is the manic depressive stage, you said that what you look for and you didn't notice was any excessive spending or partying or, showing up and with a bunch of clothes and not, or clothes or whatever purchases from a store and not realizing where you got them. How are you going to notice that or rule that out based on her partying or, excessive spending if she's locked up in a jail? That seems like that's kind of a no-go, but yet you told the jury this.
So when you asked that question, you added the dissociative and the bipolar together. So
Well, I'll just talk about the bipolar.
well, those were the examples that you gave, but specific to a bipolar disorder, somebody who might be presenting that way in the jail would likely not be sleeping consistently. They'd be very hyperactive, almost like jumping around and really fidgety all of the time. They would be talking very rapidly. They would have a flight of ideas. So going, jumping from subject to subject and just talk, you can't follow the conversation along. It's very fast and rapid. So that's how I would assess for that in a jail setting.
So again, she was locked down 23 hours a day. So a lot of that could be going on. She could be talking to God in Latin in her jail cell, and you or nobody else would even know that, would you?
So we were talking about the March 5th date, and she reported none of those symptoms. So that's how I can rule it out at that time.
Okay. And is that a common sign when somebody's asked, do you suffer from this mental illness? And if they deny it, well, that's it.
Unless there's contradictory evidence to it.
Okay. Are you aware that many people that are sick will deny being sick?
I am.
Okay. Like they don't want to take their medicines. There's nothing wrong with them. I like living in my crazy wide world and there's nothing wrong with me.
Sure, but there's still observable symptoms by other people just because somebody denies it. Again, as I explained, when I'm assessing somebody, I look at all of their body features, their speech, their language, movement, and did not note any of that. So that would be consistent with not having that concern at that time.
So what they say, a patient is not determinant of whether they have the mental disorder or not.
Not exclusively.
It's part of it, and it's just a case-by-case basis.
Absolutely.
So I'm looking in the DSM-5 under the dissociative identity disorder section, and it says older individuals may present to treatment with what appear to be late life mood disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, paranoia, psychotic mood disorders. But actually, it turns out it's dissociative identity disorder. Does that sound correct?
That could be a possibility, yes.
And you correct me if I'm wrong, that means that people can later in their life, I'm obviously not children, but probably adults are talking about, they can appear with what may originally be diagnosed as obsessive compulsive disorders, paranoia, some other psychotic mood disorders, but it's actually dissociative identity disorder, correct?
It could.
Can you have dissociative identity disorder and bipolar or major depressive disorder or, general, anxiety? Can you have many diagnoses or will one subsume all the other ones?
It's very dependent on what the combination of diagnoses that you would have, because a lot of symptoms could overlap in different diagnoses. So I couldn't answer that specifically.
Okay. Did you ever review any reports from her psychiatrist, psychologist that she consulted with several times in late 2019, December of 2019? So just a few months before you met with her. Did you ever review those records?
She had denied seeing anybody but her primary care provider for the information. And then the only treatment records we requested to obtain was from, I believe, South Carolina.
Okay. So if somebody did see a psychiatrist or a psychologist in December of 2019, was charged with committing a murder of a young child, as in this case, within a month or so of that, and they were diagnosed with a mental health disorder, would that have been relevant or helped you in determining what was going on with Ms. Stauch when you had her at the jail?
I believe that all information is relevant.
But she didn't. So if somebody doesn't tell you what they've seen or what they've done or what treatment they had, are you not able to get those records?
If I don't know where to request records from, I can't just throw out an
Okay.
ROI to every place. So
Okay.
no, I wouldn't.
And that's fair enough. I didn't know if there was some kind of like, you know, general data bank where you could go and get all the records from a certain person, or what. You still have to go around piecemeal and track them down. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you talked about, Mr. Young talked about a 2018 mental health day in a Canadian mental health hospital. Do you remember discussing that with Mr. Young?
Yes.
Okay. And you have no records of that, do you?
I do not.
Okay. And you didn't even put in for those records.
I did not.
Okay. So she could have actually done that, and there could be records of a stay in Canada in 2018, or there may not be. It could be something she made up, correct?
Absolutely.
But you don't know which is which.
I do not.
So one of the things in your report that goes along with dissociative identity disorder, or maybe it's bipolar, you correct me, please, is that there needs to have been some sort of suicide ideation or actually an attempt made. Is that correct?
So
Is that for DID or bipolar?
it could happen with either, but what I had previously said was that so in the DSM there's kind of association. So again, there's the criteria, but then all of these other things that kind of help you make the diagnosis, confirm or refute it. And in the DSM, it says that about 70% of people who are diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder have repeated and frequent suicidal ideation and have potentially attempted suicide as well.
Okay. So the flip of that is 30% have not attempted suicide.
Yes.
Okay. But the majority of diagnosed DID people, and DID is dissociative identity disorder, the majority, 70%, have had some type of suicide attempt or ideation. So is that correct?
Repeated.
Repeated?
Yes.
Okay, so more than one.
Yes.
Okay. And Ms. Stauch, when she was brought in and for several weeks after she was at the jail, she was on suicide watch, correct?
That was my decision, not her saying that she was suicidal. I did
Okay,
that for her safety,
but she was on suicide watch.
which I put her on for her safety. Yes.
One of the things you talked to Mr. Young about is he asked you this, and I actually had to have a little chuckle, but he asked you about a normal person charged with first-degree murder. Is there a standard behavior pattern for a person charged with first-degree murder?
It varies. I've worked with lots of people who have been charged with that, and
I have too. And it varies, doesn't it?
it does. It can.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's not really a normal person charged with first-degree murder behavior, is there?
It's not.
Can I get a tissue?
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm sorry, Your Honor. That's all I have for now, Your Honor. Thank you.
Redirect? Mr.
Yes,
Young?
sir. Thanks. Is everyone who commits first-degree murder placed on suicide watch when they entered the jail?
Yes.
Is that standard regardless of what your evaluation says or whether or not you see any signs of mental illness with those individuals?
Yes.
Is that what happened with Ms. Stauch?
Yes.
Had nothing to do with any potential diagnosis?
Correct.
And is your role to rule out any diagnosis with Ms. Stauch?
It's mostly to assess for the current symptoms and ensure her safety and stability in the jail.
Remember when we started out, it seems like days ago, about a clinical evaluation versus a forensic evaluation?
Yes.
Are you more on the clinical side when you meet Ms. Stauch on March 5th, 2020 to treat her for any illnesses that she might have?
Yes.
And did you see any illnesses that needed treated on March 5th of 2020?
Just the anxiety.
And if she was diagnosed with anxiety in 2019 in the month of December, would that be consistent with what you saw?
Yes.
There was a lot of discussion about her bringing up the fact that she may have been a victim of sexual assault on cross-examination. Do you remember that?
Yes.
There in your notes, the first time that you make a note about it is in what time is that? Do you recall?
I think that was the June. Yeah, the June 5th.
Well, is that your notes or is that
Or-
someone else's notes?
Sorry, I'm getting confused. I think we established that it was the molestation was June she talked about, and then I don't remember the other date about the assault, whatever date that was, the sexual assault.
On June 5th, and we talked about this on direct examination as well. She mentions that one of her traumatic stresses was molestation at age 14. Initially, she told Tara Sabo. Who's Tara Sabo?
She is a nurse that worked in our intake area.
And that's TERRASABO.
Yes.
That she was sexually assaulted in 2019.
Yes.
a few months or a year before you met her on March 5th of 2020.
Yes.
And that's when that note is dated, right? March 5th of 2020.
Yes.
The first time she mentions anything about her stepfather and her uncle is in that later note towards the end of your contact with her. Is that correct?
Yes.
Council just asked you some questions about people may not want to be upfront with their mental illnesses, and you said that may be common, correct?
Yes.
In your setting at the jail, is it common for people to fake their mental illnesses?
Yes.
And is it common, as it mentioned in the DSM-5 about the cautionary statement, is that why you need to be careful when you're diagnosing someone in a jail setting who may have something to gain based on your diagnosis?
Absolutely.
And did that come into play during your entire contact and why you were able to say she does not have dissociative identity disorder?
Objection leading, Your Honor.
Well, it was compound all. You need to rephrase.
Did that have an impact on your opinion that she rendered that she does not have dissociative identity disorder?
Yes.
Why?
Because the presentation that she had was in, especially in the beginning, there was no overt symptoms of anything. And then once competency was raised, there was all of these symptoms that just popped up out of nowhere seemingly. And so that was inconsistent with somebody who would have had reported these symptoms and had concerns with these symptoms ahead of time prior to competency being raised.
Counsel asked you some questions about her comfort level in talking to you because there's two deputies around. Do you recall that line of questioning?
Yes.
Did she have any issues talking to you and telling you not only things about herself, but things about the actual crime itself?
No.
Did she, I think we talked about this on direct, but would she just blurt things out to you and nonstop talking kind of thing?
Yes.
Did you have to ask a lot of questions or did you just sit and listen?
A lot of it was listening.
The conversation you had with her on March 20th of 2020 about Gannon's body being found. Do you remember counsel asking you questions about that?
Yes.
He asked you a hypothetical about if the attorneys came in and told her about it, then she would have known about it before you talked to her. Do you remember that line of questioning?
Yes.
Does the jail keep track when attorneys visit the jail?
Yes.
And do you have a log of every time the attorneys make a professional visit?
The jail would, I do not.
Have you seen those logs before?
I don't think so.
May I approach her?
You're the witness.
The witness.
Okay, go ahead.
I'd like to see what he's.
Oh, yep, that's true.
May I approach the witness?
You may, go ahead.
Recognize that document?
Yes, it's the visitation log report.
And is it the visitation log reports for Ms. Stauch
Yes.
at the El Paso County Jail?
Is hearsay. Can't testify to what that is. If they want to get somebody that can lay a proper foundation for this document, that's fine. This is not the person to do that.
Well, she may be, she may not be. I don't know that. You need to ask her whether or not it's a business record and whether she can lay the foundation for a business record.
You recognize this document as a business record?
Yes.
Surprise question, right? Is this something that's routinely kept at the jail and is actually an open record for the public?
Yes.
And is this a business record with regards to professional visits of Ms. Stauch?
Yes.
And would this reflect any professional visits by her attorneys in the time frame we're talking about, March 20th?
Your Honor, I'm objecting
Yes.
under Crawford. This is hearsay. I can't cross-examine this document or the person.
Your Honor, he brought this up.
Stop, both of you. Okay. I have an objection. If I want a response, I'll ask for one. The objection's overruled. Right now, we're working on laying a business record exception to the hearsay rule. So let's deal with that first. It hasn't been asked to be offered to be admitted yet. but I understand what we're dealing with. It's been identified for the record. Go ahead and move it.
And Your Honor, you advised Mr. Young to not taunt me in open court. He's actually the person who brought this up originally, so yelling across the courtroom, I don't appreciate, and I don't think it's professional.
Let's make sure we're all on the same page. I make the rulings. Everybody directs their comments to me. If there's an objection, I'll ask for a grounds. I'll rule on the objection. We'll move on. So everybody, both sides, direct your comments to me. And we'll leave it at that. Mr. Young, you were in the midst of making or establishing a foundation for a business record. Go ahead.
So this is what you purported it to be, the jail logs for professional visits at that time frame when Ms. Stauch told you that Gannon was found in Florida. You remember that?
Yes.
And would this indicate to you whether or not her attorneys had access to her prior to Gannon's body being found and prior to you talking to her about Gannon's body being found?
They did not.
Okay. Does it tell you when the last professional visit was prior to that contact?
March 13th of 2020.
And when was the next visit after your conversation with her on March 2020?
April 9th, 2020.
In addition to what we just talked about, what was her demeanor like when she was telling you that Gannon's body was found in Florida?
She was a bit tearful, but again, also kind of asking about or focusing on other.
Overruled, it was covered in cross-examination as proper redirect.
Please continue. What was her demeanor like as she's telling you these things?
She was a bit tearful, but also asking about other things and not totally focused on just the loss of a child at that time, or confirmation of that, I should say.
Did you have any indication that perhaps she had heard this already from anyone?
No.
With regards to your March 5th, 2020 first conversation with her, counsel asked you questions about ruling out DID or dissociative identity disorder at that time. Do you recall that line of questioning?
Yes.
Were you there to make a diagnosis? Were you ruling anything out, or were you basing your opinion on what you learned from her on that day?
Kind of a little bit of both, but a lot of an initial mental health assessment, especially in a jail setting, would be to take what the person says and go with that. And then again, if there's additional information that comes up to confirm or refute something later, then we can do that.
Did you have any notes or any indication that Ms. Stauch was eating her own feces in the jail cell?
No.
Would you have known that if that was going to happen, if that happened?
Yes.
Counsel asked you questions about sometimes that it takes years to make a diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder. Do you remember that question?
Yes.
Do people who actually suffer from this disorder, do they know they have that disorder prior to getting treatment?
Most often not. They could, but it's pretty rare. And again, that they would be reporting other symptoms, other things that they were concerned of, such as gaps of time missing and unexplained things showing up and forgetting how to work or forgetting how to drive. So they would be reporting, they might not say, hey, I have another personality, but they would be reporting all of these other concerns that would then support a diagnosis.
Would oftentimes family members
Yes.
report that diagnosis? For instance, a spouse. My husband didn't know who I was yesterday. It was weird. We need help.
Yes.
Is that common? Is that how people discover this disorder?
Typically, there would be other observations, other people reporting if that person had no recollection of that, or or weren't reporting it themselves, they would, a lot of collateral contacts, a lot of observations would be seen by a spouse, family members, deputies, other mental health staff, things like that.
And when you're in your vast experience of, I'm assuming you've had a lot of contact with people who have serious mental illness.
Yes.
Is it something that's very obvious to you when you see it or when you're talking to someone? For instance, we talked about the psychosis issues. I mean, do you know it when you see it?
Yes, I've worked in this field for over 10 years, and most of my contacts have been with very severe and persistently mentally ill people. And so I am very familiar, very comfortable with spotting things very quickly.
And would family members also know that if they had a loved one that they've been around their whole lives? Would they note if someone had a serious mental illness?
Well, she's been qualified as an expert. I think she can give her opinion based on her expertise. It goes to weight, not admissibility.
Would they note if their family member had a serious mental illness and report it and say something's wrong here?
Absolutely. We've had calls at the jail from family members reporting their loved ones' concerns.
Those are my questions, John. Thanks.
Do any of the jurors have any questions for Dr. Moore? Looks like we have one.
Your Honor, very quickly, I'd like to, based on a new document that was introduced. Correct.
Counsel approach.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Right.
Just going to do a couple of follow-ups.
Okay.
So March the 20th of 2020, everything in the city and the country and the state went into lockdown because of COVID. Do you remember that?
I don't know if it was that exact date, but yeah.
Okay. Do you remember that a lockdown went into effect in the jail and there were no personal visits for a period of time because of the COVID pandemic at the jail?
I don't recall any specific thing about that. Is that like, could that have happened? Yes, but I don't know exactly what dates that would have been.
And do you know that that jail log does not reflect WebEx or video visits between attorneys and clients? Were you aware of that?
It just says visitation log,
Okay.
so
If I told you that was for in-person visits only, would that change your answer?
I'm gonna object, Your Honor.
That's
Lack of
sustained.
foundation.
Sustained.
Okay. Do you know that there were WebEx visits or video visits going on between attorneys and defendants incarcerated at the jail during this pandemic period?
if you're asking if that occurs, I believe it would.
Okay. And were you aware that the document you're looking at only shows in-person visits where somebody comes physically down to the jail and does a visit at the jail and does not reflect any WebEx or video visits?
I couldn't say one way or the other.
Okay. So you can't say one way or the other whether there was a video visit done on March the 20th between Ms. Stauch and her attorneys.
Asked and answered, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Just
Right. Dr. Moore, if the defendant's claims were true, that she was sexually, physically, and emotionally abused on an ongoing basis from a young age, is it your professional opinion that such a person can still grow up to be sane even if untreated?
Yes.
All right, I will allow reasonable follow-up as to that question only. Prosecution?
No, thank you.
I don't have
Defense?
anything. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Moore. You can step down. Watch your step as you step down, please.
Your Honor, may I retrieve the document from Dr. Moore?
Oh, yes, right.
Thanks.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take our evening break. Again, I have a message that we are anticipating a weather event. And in Colorado, that could mean that we might have a wet street tomorrow. It could also mean that we have 3 feet of snow somewhere in between. Don't know. Here's what I can tell you is that the county, there's usually a meeting at 9 o'clock at night, the day before, and then at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I can assure you that I do not intend to call any of you at 5 o'clock in the morning, so you don't have to worry about that part. The best advisement is, or the best place to get advice about what has happened or the status about what has happened is 719-520-SNOW. That will tell you about the El Paso County Combined Courts. That's what we are. And oftentimes, actually all the time, these decisions are really not made based on what's going on in the courthouse. It's based on what's going on everywhere else. Because oftentimes the courthouse takes up a lot of resources from the El Paso County Sheriff's Office. And sometimes because of adverse weather events, those resources are needed elsewhere in the county. And because of that, the courthouse just can't function. And so what happens is they either close the courthouse or they will have a delayed start. If we have a delayed start, meet Mr. Combs where you would normally meet Mr. Combs at 10 o'clock. And then we will start here at 10:30. So you'll meet him, bring you over the way that he has every morning before, and then we'll be in place to start at 10:30. The good news is that even with a delayed start and things like that, I think we are ahead of where the attorneys thought we would be at this point in the process. So things are going, whether it seems like it or not, things are going faster than what we had anticipated when we started this. So we're still in pretty good shape in that regard. The most important thing is to be safe. When you're going home tonight, when you're coming in tomorrow, just be safe. Make sure that you have my card so that if you need to call us, you can do that, so that we're not worried about you, where you might be or something like that. Please just let us know if there's a delay. There are, can I get a show of hands of people who are Palmer Divide region, Black Forest region, Teller County? Okay, I think probably you are the ones that it's going to most impact. That's what I understand. So we'll keep an eye out for that. Hopefully, we've had such warm weather recently that while we get snow on the ground, it may not be in the road and everything will be okay. But that's the plan. You can always call us in the morning and find out, or call us and check and see if there's any update or anything like that if you want to do that. If you call 520 SNOW and there's no message on there, anticipate being here at the time that you normally would be here. So the only reason why you would be late is if you get the message from 520 SNOW or something like that. Okay. So again, don't discuss the case among yourselves. Don't discuss the case with anyone else. Don't do any research about any aspect of this case. Be safe. We'll see you in the morning. All rise. Thank you. Record should reflect the jury has left the courtroom. You may all be seated. I guess we'll just have to play it by ear and see what's going on. I assume that Dr. Grimmett must be staying somewhere close.
Yeah, she's staying somewhere close in town. There is a phone call tomorrow morning at 4:30. I'm on it. The sheriff's on it. Chief Judge Bain is on it. Emergency management folks. So
Right.
there is a plan as far as to discuss any road conditions, and we'll know that tomorrow
Okay.
morning.
So we'll just, I'm gonna plan on same time, same station, unless we hear something different. And stay in touch with, you must have contact information for Dr. Grimmett, right?
We do.
Okay.
Yes.
So stay in touch with her and just let her know what the flex is in the event that it becomes that way. We'll start at 9 o'clock if everything's okay. If not, we'll, she needs to be here at 10:30 and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, what we've tentatively told her is to be here at 8:45 unless she hears from us. We also gave her the snow line and asked her to be here at 10 if there is a delay.
Okay. And the only other issue that I see is, are you calling either Dr. Torres or Dr. Gray tomorrow?
We were tentatively scheduling Dr. Torres to be at 9, but obviously that's being pushed back now anyway because Dr. Grimmett still needs to testify, but she is on the schedule for
Is she
tomorrow.
from Pueblo?
She lives here in the Springs.
Oh, okay. I was thinking if she had to drive up, it may be an issue, but okay. All right. Okay, then we'll see everybody in the morning. Thank you.
Just one thing while we're all here, Your
Mr.
Honor.
Cook?
Based on some of the testimony today, we can follow up with a written supplemental endorsement, but it would be for rebuttal. We'd like to introduce or endorse Katie Strobel or Kim Chalmers as possible defense witnesses. Attorneys of Miss Stauch.
And the purpose?
Purposes, they would have done the visits through WebEx on the day in question.
And there's and so they're going to testify about a conversation they had with Ms. Stauch and what it was that they told her.
Your Honor, I don't know. I'm just putting it's a possibility.
Well, the reason why I asked that question is because what I'm going to get is whether or not there's a waiver of attorney-client privilege.
We haven't
Right.
made a decision. I just want.
Okay. So obviously, and you don't get to make that decision, Ms. Stauch does.
I understand.
And that's a conversation that I would have to have with her, because it's not, if this were just an issue of Ms. Strobel or Ms. Chalmers were going to testify that they made a phone call, that's one thing. But here the issue is, what was the information that was relayed in that phone call? And that clearly implicates the attorney-client privilege, and can only be waived by Ms. Stauch.
Understood, Your Honor.
So, and right now, as I see it, there is really no evidence of any conversation, which is why the DA is, I don't see this as an attorney-client waiver yet, because there's been no evidence that's been introduced about that. There's been all kinds of innuendo, but as I told the jury, nothing that the attorneys say is evidence. So I can tell you that before they would testify, I would have to have a long conversation with Ms. Stauch. Okay. All right. All right. Court will be in recess then.